This is the environment that we have to work in. So you either say to yourself, I can't get a hold of these people, and you're not going to call them, or you understand these challenges and adjust your game plan. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. And it's not revolutionary. Basically, we're going to try to contact the prospect in many ways and many different times. And that's going to involve cold calling and using the phone. And that's going to involve sending emails. And we're going to leave voicemails aren't great, but it's one way that we can communicate with the prospects. So when you have these different ways of communicating with prospects, you may ask yourself, well, how many times should I call them? How often should I call them? How many emails should I send? How often should I send my emails? How many voicemails should I leave? When should I leave voicemail messages? So it's very common to not know what to do in these areas. And I'm not going to say that I have the perfect answer for exactly how many emails to send or how many calls to make. But what I will give you is a very clear process that you can implement and use. And this process that I'm going to share with you, I refer to as a prospecting cadence. And another word for cadence is rhythm. So in the same way that your heartbeat has a rhythm or music has a rhythm in terms of how often there's a note or a beat and the different instruments that are used to compose music, we're going to use that same approach with your prospecting. And just like musicians have different instruments, your different instruments are your emails and your calls and your voicemails and the different ways that you're reaching out and communicating with your prospects. And the frequency of your messages is the tempo or the beat of the music. What I want to do is I want to show you a prospecting cadence that is more thorough with more attempts. It starts with sending a cold email. Then days 2 through 7, we're going to call the prospect. And during this period, we're going to call multiple times without leaving a voicemail message. We could call up to 3 to 5 times, maybe once a day. And we can call every day without feeling like a stalker because we're not leaving a voicemail message. We're going to operate with the assumption that they don't know we called yesterday, so we're going to try them again today. And this is basically week 1, round 1 of our prospecting cadence. Now we're progressing to week 2. And on day 8, we're going to call the prospect again. And this is 1 week after we sent our cold email. At this point, we're going to leave a voicemail message. Right after we leave our voicemail message, we're going to send our voicemail follow-up email. And at this point, we're going to pause because we just left a voicemail and we just sent another email. And we're going to pause for the remainder of week 2. For round 1, we can use our value points building block. So the email focuses on benefits, the voicemail message focuses on benefits, and then we progress to round 2. And this might look complex, but this is pretty simple because round 2 is exactly the same. When we get to week 3, and this is 1 week after we just left our voicemail message, we can send email 2. And we go through the same process. At this point, we can use a different part of our message. So we can use our pain points building block. And the voicemail follow-up email, we can focus on the pain points and the challenges that we help to solve. So our messaging will be slightly different in round 2. And that accomplishes a couple things. One is we're starting to build on the story we've already started telling with the prospect. We might talk about different things and hit a chord that we might not have hit in round 1. And we're having that repetition of continuing trying to reach out to the prospect. Then we progress to round 3, and it's the exact same steps, but slightly different messaging. At this point, we can use our customer example building block. Then we progress to round 4. Same steps, slightly different message. At this point, we can start to use our product building block. So this is actually where we start to talk about us and what we sell, and we can get a little bit more direct with what we're trying to reach out with the prospect on. And this is the messaging that most salespeople send in their version of round 1, their first cold email. We're getting to this after sending multiple emails and reaching out multiple times. And so this is what that process looks like if you look at it all together. So as you can see, a lot of attempts, a lot of emails, and different messaging throughout. And this might look complicated to you when you look at all these individual steps, but it's actually pretty simple, and we can actually simplify it down to the first week, we're going to send 1 cold email and call them a bunch of times and not leave a voicemail. Week 2, we call them and leave a voicemail and send a voicemail follow-up email, and that's it. And then we do the same thing for those other rounds. So it looks like a lot of complex steps to go through, but it's pretty simple in terms of what you're doing, and the rhythm just repeats itself. If you use SalesScripter to build your sales message, then SalesScripter will provide email templates that you can use for that prospecting cadence. For example, here's a cold email thread that's generated by the software. And you can see this email series that's generated by the software actually aligns with that prospecting cadence that I just showed you. So email 1 is value, email 2 is pain, email 3 is customer example, email 5 is a product message. So here are all the emails that you can send as part of that prospecting cadence. You could also use SalesScripter to automate the delivery of those emails. We have email campaigns, and this is where you could actually create an email campaign where you set up the emails to go out, and you could set those to go out every 2 weeks where your emails are being automated, and then between those automated emails are the calls that you're making to those prospects. But as both you and I know, you could call a contact 100 times and still get their voicemail every time that you call them. So what are we going to do about that challenge? And what we're going to do is we're going to use a concept that I call organizational movement. And this is basically finding a different way into the accounts that we're trying to get into. And there's 2 types of organizational movement. First, we have vertical movement. So if we're trying to call into a department, say IT, there's multiple levels in that department. So if our target prospect is the VP of IT, and we can't get a hold of the VP of IT, what we can do is we can move up and down the organization to try to find another way in. For example, we can try to call the CIO. Now, I'm not going to say that if you can't get a hold of the VP of IT, that the CIO is going to be any easier to get a hold of. But when you increase the people that you're trying to reach at the business from 1 person to 2 people, you increase the odds of getting a hold of someone. And what we can also do is go lower in the organization. So if we're trying to reach the VP of IT, we can move on to try to call the director of IT. And not only does that help us because we're trying to reach more people in the organization, but actually when you move lower in the organization, the people that you're trying to reach usually become more available and easier to get a hold of. We can also implement horizontal movement, and this is moving laterally in the organization to other departments. So if we're selling software to businesses, most likely we're trying to sell to IT, but you can usually sell your software to other departments in the organization. For example, maybe we can sell our software to operations. If we sell inventory management software, yes, IT might buy the inventory management software and might be the final decision maker, but it's the operations department that orders the inventory and needs to manage the inventory. So it's the operations department that's just as involved. Usually selling your software to the business unit, such as operations or finance or HR, the business unit that consumes and uses the software that IT manages, talking to the business unit is usually more productive, a better place to generate leads, easier to get into. IT is very difficult to get into. Everybody is selling to IT, and so many different types of salespeople are selling to IT. If you sell software, you're competing against salespeople that sell hardware, people that sell services, people that sell recruiting and staffing, people that sell consulting services. Everybody's selling into IT. That's why IT rarely answers the phone and is very difficult to get into. Now, if we look at what this organizational movement might look like from an organization standpoint, if we're going after the VP of IT because we sell software, and then if we apply that horizontal and vertical movement, look at all these other people that we can reach out to in the organization. So moving in this way will greatly improve the odds of you getting in. Now, we can actually combine the concept of the prospecting cadence with organizational movement in a very organized way. So let's say that we go to LinkedIn and we find the VP of IT or the director of IT. We add that contact to our prospecting cadence. And unfortunately, we are still having trouble getting a hold of this contact at the end of round 2. This is a great moment to implement organizational movement. So after we leave that second voicemail message, what we can do is now let's go back to LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a great tool to also use for organizational movement. We can go to LinkedIn and do a search specific to that company and specific by title or keywords and find someone either in another department or different level of the organization. And when we find that person, then the second contact that we found, we add to our prospecting cadence. And we start in round 1 by sending our cold email. Now, at this point, we will have 2 contacts at that business that we're working through our prospecting cadence. And we continue through the other rounds. When we get to the end of round 4 with that first contact, we will reach the end of round 2 with the second contact. And at that point, we could do organizational movement to find a third contact at that business. Now, since we're at the end of round 4 with our first contact, we may reach a point where we label that contact as unreachable and we move on. And what I would tell you is that if you move on after round 4, you can have the confidence that you did everything you could to reach out to that contact and that this is a contact that you probably will never be able to get a hold of. But because of our organizational movement, we're still trying to find a way into that account, and now we have other contacts that we're pursuing. Hopefully that helps you with reaching out. And in our next video, we will talk about gathering information. So when you start to engage with these prospects, how you can extract and gather the most information that you can. If you have any questions or you want more information, the best place to go is salescriptor.com. I hope this was helpful, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.